Over the deserts. Yeah. Okay. So the tropics, lots of rain. The subtropics, huge deserts. This is where the Saharan desert comes from, as I understand. There's not really a rain shadow. There's not a mountain range there necessarily causing it. It is because of this whole pressure thing. So deserts can exist right there with tropics underneath them. Was there another hand raised on this? Okay. Yeah. But we got it? Okay. All right, so that covers deserts. Deserts are one of the ones that fantasy writers like to do horribly, horribly wrong. And I didn't know a lot of this stuff when I started. It's just, like I said, 15 minutes of let's try and get it a little bit righter. One of the other things that we tend to do is we don't transition between types of terrain very well. In fantasy books, it's like, here's the desert region, and here's the jungle region, and here's the mountain region. And that's problematic because usually we're going to have various transitional stages. Lots of foothills to the mountains where things start to rise. And those are going to be, let's see, are those, get that wrong? Are they older mountains? And the newer ones are farming in the center and pushing them away, which is why one of the reasons why there's the smoother hills and then the bigger ones. I don't know, but you do usually have the foothills. You're going to transition between a jungle and something that's not a jungle. You generally aren't going to have a jungle and a desert right next to each other. You're going to have a jungle and then some area of nice fertility, and then that rain has stopped falling, and then there's going to be the subtropics with a desert. Not all the subtropics are deserts. And then, you're going to transition into something else. So, transitional areas. All right. Anything else that I'm skipping here from our map experts? Like I said, I only want to do some of the basics. Yeah. Caves. Okay, what about caves?
They generally form in limestone and nothing else.
Okay.
So
there you
I've read
go.
a lot of books where people find sandstone caves, and that's where I roll my eyes.
Okay. Limestone caves. There you go. All right. So that's a little bit of world building for you. Understand that not every book you're going to write has to have a map. The map should add something to the book. If it's something you like, put it in. If it is not something you like, you don't have to have one. I happen to really like them. I like having lots of them, though one of my deals is, particularly recently, I've tried to set all my maps in world, as maps have come from either scribes or surveyors or artists in world to give more feeling and depth to the story that's being told, rather than just saying, here's a fantasy book, it has to have a map, so here's the map. My experience has been that the publisher will have the map done for you, but they will kind of get around to it eventually, and it's not going to be a priority, and it may or may not actually be good. From the beginning, I learned that on Elantris while they were kind of hoeing and humming. I said, well, why don't I just hire my friend to do it? And ever since then, I've had all my maps done and just given them to the publisher, and they don't mind that. They actually like it. Don't try to do that with any sort of cover material, because the cover material is a poster for the book rather than a depiction of what's in the book. But the maps and things like that are things that you can do and turn in, and if you get a good one, great. I actually buy the copyright to all of my maps so that I own it, so that there are no rights issues when I want to use it on a website or a foreign publisher wants to use it or something like that. That means I pay out of pocket for my maps and send a work-for-hire contract to the artist. Work for hire is going to cost more, but it's what you really want to do rather than paying them royalties. And then I use that map in my books. And I strongly suggest that you do that, but don't worry about it till your book is sold. Don't send a map with your manuscript that you submit.
So I've never bought a map before. How much do they cost?
It depends. I pay line art for one page worth of line art, whether it's comic books or whatnot, usually goes for about $500. And so that's kind of a starting point, I would say. If you want something like the maps in the Way of Kings, they're a fair bit more expensive than that. But $500, I would say, is what you should be looking at paying, and make sure it's a nice work-for-hire contract. They understand it's work-for-hire, and there you go.
So when you talk about maps, it seems mostly fall into the category for fantasy novels, where you're creating a new world. What
Yep.
about when you're doing sci-fi novels, using existing worlds, or if you're going across space, you have a map of the galaxy?
If you want one,
Like, what sort of things do you recommend in those cases?
I like them, but fewer science fiction writers use them. I think they add to the world. So yeah, it's just going to be your call. All of this stuff can come for designing a planet that you're going to be having, your OA party land on. And if everything's going to take place on that planet, having a map's probably a good idea. It's, your actual... Once you get down to this stuff, what you add after that is going to be more science fiction-y. You'll have roads, you'll have things like that. Well, this will have roads too, but you know what I mean. You'll have freeways, or airship lines, or whatever it is. But yeah,
If you said you've done single maps in world, like characters from the book
yeah.
will do them, does that mean that you can put mistakes in there?
Yes.
And kind of play with that? Is that allowed?
Anything's allowed. You ask me
Will that
what's
not make the
allowed?
readers really angry?
I don't know. I've done it, but yeah.
Oh, isn't it the Stormlight Archive? Was it Isaac or you that put in, like, the cartographer actually named it something after
Yeah, the
himself?
cartographer named a bunch of stuff after himself. Isaac put that in. It's like, I figured this guy would name everything after himself. So you go read it, and there's this one very fanciful sort of artistic rendition that does not look very... a lot of liberties are taken. And among those liberties, the artist names a river and, like, a mountain and, like, all these things after himself, if you go actually read the key. So, fun things like that.
Do you suggest making a map just for yourself as you're kind of moving your
I do.
people through it?
I do. It particularly if your map is going to be if your character's going to move around a lot, you're going to want to have distances so you know how far things are apart. I have written down, and I wish I had it for you. I'll have to look and see if I can find it for next week. I have written down how far a person can travel walking along a road or across rough terrain, or how fast a horse goes and things like this. One thing, this is just a quick one. Horses don't move much faster than people. Just keep that in mind when you're riding your horse someplace. In fact, a long distance, a cross-country runner will go faster than a horse will between 2 points. Horses are not fast. Horses are sprinters. They're fast for a few minutes, and they're easier to ride on than to walk if you're going to go a long distance, which is why people use them. They can carry more. Instead of carrying this big pack and hiking along, you can walk, but you're not going to go any faster. In fact, I believe generally it's about the same speed, and if you're going to take a cart or a wagon, you're going to go slower than walking. So that's a mistake a lot of people make. Now, if you want to get somewhere really fast, and you can trade horses, you can get someplace really fast. If you've got 5 horses, and you can ride on one while and going at a fair clip, and then trade, and then trade, and then trade, and then at the end of the day get 5 more horses at a place. And they used to do this, by the way. You could go. What's that? Well, Pony Express did this, but they actually had places where you could go and loan your horse and get another horse, and things like that, so that you could get somewhere really fast. And then you'd pick it up on the way back or whatnot. It's kind of like those bikes that they have in big cities that you can take and ride to one place and then get off and stuff like that. They actually did some things like that. But anyway, if you want to get somewhere really fast, you need to be trading horses.
How often, like every 3 hours?
I always look it up. I think it's less than I think it's more like a half hour, but I could be wrong. Yeah.
Related to this, whenever I've played at map making, I always get confused then about distance, about how far away would towns be in
Right.
cities, and like when I look at my map, well, how
Yeah.
big is this actually?
Right. I would suggest making things smaller than you think in your head that they should be. But large population centers did start to crop up. Like New York was 1 million people at the turn of the century, 1900, or even a little bit more. And so you can have, by then, some large population centers grow up. But medieval times, general rule of thumb, someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 10 to 1. 10 farmers were required for every 1 person living in the city.
Also, when you're making kind of nations, do you ever
Yeah.
consider kind of the travel limitations, like
Definitely.
with how big they can
Yeah, and this is why I suggest making things smaller as opposed to larger. I know you want to go for epic scope, but for instance, I stayed away. Even if you look at the Wheel of Time, it looks really big, but the place is not very big. Robert Jordan intentionally designed it fairly small. It's like, I think, the size of just like 2 states. Because in order to get people around, if you'd had a kingdom or a world map the size of the United States, crossing the United States with wagons took a long time. You've read the pioneer stories and things. You'd have to leave people alone for 6 months to get where they're going. And so shrinking things down is probably a good idea. Keeping fewer people in your cities than you actually think. You want a bustling metropolis. A bustling metropolis of 25,000 is pretty big in a lot of the medieval stages. If you're doing fantasy, if you're doing science fiction, it's all about food delivery and waste management. Actually, it is in fantasy anyway. Those are the 2 things you need to worry about.
Something that's really interesting to do is look at like old maps of Europe and stuff, and just see like how far a language went before it runs into another language. Countries in Europe are about as big as states in the United States, and that's how medieval things were.
Yeah.
When you say medieval, do you also include Renaissance?
Renaissance starts to change because of some of the sanitation that they started to figure out, which is a big deal. But of course, ancient Rome figured some of that stuff out in really cool ways too. If you can get water to the city and waste away from the people, and you can get food to the city, really the food is the limiting factor. If you can get food to them, you can do all sorts. That's what everything is based around. Moving your armies, building your cities. It's all about the food. A lot of times in more agriculture-based societies, the town was how far out can the farmers go each morning, work, and still get back to the town. Homesteading wasn't done as much until later on. And we're talking, like 1800s and things like that. Before then, it was usually town or village. Everyone goes out and farms, and everyone comes back in. And that's how big your town is. How far can the people go? Yeah.
One thing, looking at city populations, is the rank size rule often applies. That the second city is usually half the size of the first city. Third city is usually a third the size. It follows today, even in the United States, closely.
For a region, you're saying?
Yeah, for any given
That's
population.
Cool. So. That's pretty cool. One I forgot that's actually very important, since we're talking about cities. If your city is like right here, and you've got this nice wall around your city, and here's your ocean, what's wrong with that city? Any ideas? You got nice little gates here, and there's roadways here, and you got you got parapets and things, and you've got a completely open harbor that enemies can sail their ships in and conquer your city. Most harbors, what made a great city, a good fortifiable city, was a harbor that could be defended. Okay, a defensible harbor is a huge thing, and yes, you would even have. And some ancient that they would build walls out into the ocean and then strap a chain across, which was kind of one of the basic ways. But a great, why some cities grew up where they did is because instead of this, you have a natural breakwater right here. That's not drawn the way it would be, but you have a natural breakwater, and a natural breakwater is awesome for a harbor. Number one, it allows you to defend this little part because they can't sail ships across this, even if this is just a reef. But it also stops the waves from coming in and crashing against your port and rocking all your boats and things like that, which is really kind of useful. There are a lot of places in Europe like this where they actually have a few little islands out here. That is awesome. Particularly when you start to get into gunpowder eras, because you put a couple cannons on here, nobody's getting in that harbor. And that can be, you put a fortress right there. That's when you see kind of the archetypal fortress out on a rock by itself, it's usually defending a harbor like this. So just something to keep in mind. Defending your harbor is a pretty big deal. One caveat to this is if you have a really strong navy, which you probably will if you're a coastal. But some people just plan on having their ships out there to protect their harbor.
Now, when it comes to realism, for example, do you look at cities that
are today and just kind of copy them?
Depends on what I'm trying to do. In Stormlight, no, because the setting is so different. In Mistborn, we went and said, okay, let's pull out the geological survey of London from 1820 and from Paris from 1820, and let's design a city that feels the same. And that's exactly what we did. Yeah.
So, what about resource constraints? Like, how many people live on an island?
I think we're going to start digging too deep if we start asking questions like that. That sort of thing. If you type into Google, how many people could live on this, you will start to be able to get the research you need. I just want you thinking about these things. I don't know that offhand. I think it's the 10-to-1 rule. How many people can live here? And a lot of times the islands support a smaller population and a lower technological level, depending. But once they get a little bit bigger, like England or Japan, they can really dominate because they're isolated. Nobody can get to them. They have time to kind of grow and be on their own until those Chinese or Frenchmen come over, whichever one, and try to take you over, things like that. But anyway, they can be pretty dominant. It's interesting that the small islands can become such dominant forces, and that's because back in the era when all kingdoms were about that size, they were able to keep ahead because of some of the advantages of having that nice area that's all yours. But you do have to worry about those Scots.